The Detroit Lions are kicking off their final week of training camp, and in today's practice, they wasted no time upping the intensity. Let's talk about that and more in today's training camp observation. What's going on, guys? Welcome to the Pride Detroit training camp observation. I'm Miko, and in today's video, we are once again going to break down the biggest news, takeaways, and observations to come out of today's practice with the Detroit Lions. Now, like I stated at the top of this video, the Lions don't have much time until the regular season is here, and this week kicks off their final week of training camp and their final preseason game against the Carolina Panthers. So, with all that said, when it comes down to the Lions needing to make the final observations that they have in place and getting ready to make those final cuts, this week is very crucial, especially for the players that may be on the bubble and are not necessarily locks to make this roster. Not to mention, it's also the final bit of work that even the starters can kind of get in this type of setting. And with that in mind, it kind of explains why Dan Campbell and his staff chose to have what many have described to be a mock game in today's practice. And that type of mock game environment allow for an increased level of intensity and competitiveness throughout practice. Basically, this practice was run just like a regular game would be. There was tackling, there were quarters, they were keeping score. They even took a halftime break at one point. The Lions are definitely trying to gear up the level of competitiveness amongst this team and at the same time still get their starters in the mindset of what it's like to play actual football. And for those who have been somewhat concerned that maybe the Lions starters might not be prepared because they haven't taken any preseason snaps, Dan Campbell seems to have the answer for that, and that is to put his players in as real of a situation as he possibly can without getting them injured and without losing them for the foreseeable future. So, with all of that in mind, whenever the words increased physicality and tackling seem to come into play, it almost is like a call sign to the defense to ramp up their level of play. And that's exactly what seemed to happen today. The defense was by far the better unit. Now, it's worth keeping in mind that on today's practice, it was primarily just first and second team players getting the bulk of the work. And that's likely largely due to the fact that most of the second and third team guys are going to get a lot of play once this preseason game kicks off. So, while keeping that in mind, it's no wonder that the first team defense and even some of the second team defensive players really shined in today's practice. From being able to stop the run, defend the pass, force turnovers, and even get a couple of key fourth down stops, the defense was doing it all in today's practice. And because they were keeping score and the defense was able to rack up points by either forcing turnovers, by getting third down stops, or forcing them to punt, or forcing a turnover on downs due to a failed fourth down conversion, the defense just kind of shined in every aspect of today's practice. In fact, it's reported that at one point in time during today's practice, the defense was able to hold the offense without scoring for 7 straight drives. Now, going into this offseason, we can all pretty much admit that the defense was the biggest concern that a lot of people had on their minds. Some people questioned whether Brad Holmes did enough in the draft, or if he was aggressive enough in free agency, or if there were still missing pieces at key positions. But throughout training camp, the resounding theme that has come out of most of these practices is that the defense has looked far superior, especially once they're able to be more physical and once they're able to tackle and once they're able to put on pads. That is when the defense seems to be at its best. And the thing that's most encouraging by that is that it's not just one or two players. It's literally a player at almost every key position. Derek Barnes had a great pass defense against Jameer Gibbs that turned into a turnover that Chauncey Gardner Johnson was able to pick off. Aiden Hutchinson has continued to be a beast throughout training camp and continues to apply pressure to the quarterbacks. Cam Sutton had an amazing pass defense against Marvin Jones. You can literally go down the list and start to find guys that are continuing to make plays. And with that level of play and performance, even in a mock game type format, it has to do something to you as far as getting you excited for the potential of what this defense can be. Now, obviously, we don't know what this may actually translate to once they square up against the Chiefs in week 1. But as of right now, the consistent performance that this defense has put up throughout training camp has been something that's very encouraging. Now, while I did say that it wasn't just one in particular player that was standing out the most on today's practice, when it comes to the defense, whenever there is a player that seems to be worth talking about, it always seems to be the same guy, And that guy seems to be Brian Branch. Brian Branch has gone from being a second round pick to a guy that maybe just be security for the chance of, CJ Gardner Johnson leaving after this season to now being a bona fide starting candidate. And I'm starting to even say a defensive rookie of the year candidate for the Detroit Lions based on the way he's been able to raise his game up a level and make himself a key figure in this defense. Today was once again another one of those days where Brian Branch just seemed to be able to check off every box in the statistics when it came down to making plays. If you were looking for tackles for losses, Brian Branch was doing it. If you were looking for big hits, Branch was doing it. If you were looking for turnovers, Brian Branch was doing that too. This seems to be one player that there just seems to be no slowing down when it comes down to his hype train and to the expectations that he is kind of building up for himself based on his stellar play throughout training camp. And considering how most of the NFL is now a passing league, it's almost a guarantee that Brian Branch is going to get a good heavy amount of snaps simply by playing the nickel position and needing to be out there for a number of passing situations. Now, of course, the Lions are going to have to make a tough decision when it comes down to what they're going to do week one, with Brian Branch possibly having to match up against Travis Kelsey. But the way this rookie has played throughout camp, I'm sure that Aaron Glenn and the defensive staff probably doesn't feel like that's too tall of a task for him. You guys know me, you guys know how I feel about Brian Branch, and you know I've sometimes tried to keep myself from talking about Brian Branch. But the way he's going to continue showing up throughout like these camp reports, it's nearly impossible at this point. Like I said, I'm at the point now where it's gone from like, you know what, he'll be a great, backup piece for when CJ leaves to now him being a really strong possibility of being a starter to now the only thing I have left is to say, you know what? We might need to start talking about Brian Branch as defensive rookie of the year. It might sound crazy. It might sound like a little too much hype right now, but once the regular season gets here, we're going to find out one way or the other if Brian Branch is really him. Now, while there's plenty of positive things to take away from the defensive side of the football, like we talked about with Brian Branch, like we talked about some of the other key defensive players, even John Kaminsky once again showing up in training camp and showing himself to be a force, there always is a flip side to that coin. And that means that if the defense is dominating, it probably means the offense isn't playing too well. And in this case, that's very much true. Both quarterbacks had their struggles on the day. Now, Teddy Bridgewater's struggles were definitely more severe than that of Jared Goff's, and we'll talk about Teddy in a moment. But Jared Goff had his struggles as well. After leading the first team offense down for a touchdown, it wasn't automatic for Goff without one of his top receivers in Amon-Ra St. Brown. He still found ways to make plays, especially to some of his running backs in Jahmyr Gibbs, David Montgomery. He definitely even had a connection with Sam Laporta throughout practice with a bunch of shorter passes for, running catch opportunities. But in terms of dominance, dominance belonged to the defense on today. And Jared Goff himself found himself on the wrong end of two picks in today's practice. Now, that's definitely not something that you want to hear from an offense that was ranked in the top 5 last year, but there are some circumstances that we have to keep in mind. Amon-Ra's not there. The Lions are still rotating at right guard between Halapoli Vati and Graham Glasgow. And while they both had good practices today, you have to think that that level of just, constantly switching things up throughout practice can do something to you as far as like the cohesion of an offensive line. And then the most important thing to keep in mind is that this is still practice. And of course, you want to practice how you play according to a line that CJ GJ has kind of made very popular for me. But at the same time, I'm not going to overreact to Jared Goff having a bad practice simply because, again, he doesn't have his full range of weapons. And I do think things are going to be a little bit different when play calling is in an actual game. And I know as much as they probably tried to simulate this practice like a regular game, there are still things that just don't happen in a practice setting that will happen in a game. And energy is probably higher on a game day atmosphere. So while again, today is not a great day for Goff, and it's another day of him having two picks. But at the same time, I do expect once they get into the regular season for things to get a little bit cleaner. Now, in terms of Teddy Bridgewater, again, not his best day, and Teddy, from all reports, seems to still look like a quarterback that is still getting up to speed and has not quite fully built that chemistry with his wide receivers or has a full grasp of what the offense should look like. I'm not entirely worried about Teddy to this point because ideally the thing that you're more hoping for at this point as a Lions fan is that Jared Goff stays healthy. If Jared Goff isn't healthy, then we cross the Teddy Bridgewater bridge when we get there. Again, no type of pun intended for that, but that's just the nature of the situation. I get that how some people may want to draw conclusions on Teddy and the fact of him not having good practices, but you also have to keep in mind that when if he's in an actual regular season game, these are not the receivers he's going to be throwing to. This is not the offensive line he's going to be working behind. And so there should be a level of improvement just by the structure of the players around him. Again, you still like to see him make better decisions with the football and not take as many risks or at least start to show levels of growth. And I think we'll probably start to see that in this next preseason game because I hope and expect him to still get some snaps. But there's no denying the fact that on a day where the defense is looking dominant, one of the players that they heavily dominated was Teddy Bridgewater. Now, to put a positive spin on the offense, while the quarterbacks did struggle at various points throughout practice, the run game was much better and definitely showed as a benefactor to this increased physicality, specifically when you looked at guys like David Montgomery and Craig Reynolds, and even Jameer Gibbs to an extent. But when we're talking about like tough, hard running, this is where David Montgomery was expected to shine. And he did just that in today's practice, breaking off a number of tough runs, breaking a number of tackles, and showcasing what the Lions were looking for and hoping to get by acquiring him. We all know how good this offensive line is and how this offensive line is kind of the heartbeat of this offense. And with that being the case, the next thing that the Lions tend to want to lean on is a strong run game. And when David Montgomery is able to do the things that he was doing in today's practice, again, breaking tackles, getting big chunk plays, and then you still have a change of pace back in Jameer Gibbs who can still run in between the tackles and be a weapon on the outside. This offense starts to take form in a way where, like I said earlier, even if Jared Goff might be struggling with connecting with some of his wide receivers, you still know that you have a potent part of your offense that can still work. And that seems to be with the run game. And like I said, it wasn't just Jameer Gibbs, it wasn't just David Montgomery. Even when they went to the second team, Craig Reynolds was having a day and really started to kind of put to rest the idea of who could be in the mix for RB3. We know how much the Lions have trusted Craig in the past, and if he continues this kind of performance and he can actually provide some value on special teams, he's really going to start to separate himself from the likes of Jamar Jefferson, who is also probably the next player that can really contend for being RB3. So, guys, that's going to do it for the big notes to come out of today's training camp. Again, if you're looking for some more information on training camp or you're looking for some more details on what exactly took place in today's practice, I definitely encourage you to head over to the Pride of Detroit website where you can check out Jeremy's latest article on all of the details that came out of today's practice. He also dropped a brand new podcast episode that he recorded right after practice and explaining exactly drive by drive what took place during today's mock game. It's a really good listen and it really will give you an insight into exactly what was happening and who was standing out. And again, if you want to hear some more Brian Branch news, go to that podcast. But again, guys, if there's any other information or if you have any questions, be sure to leave them in the comment section below. Also, if you're new to this channel and you've never subscribed before, be sure to hit that subscribe button and also hit that notification bell. That way you can be notified anytime we upload a new video to this channel. Once again, guys, I'm Miko here with Pride Detroit. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one.